Greetings, happy warriors, and welcome to the Rabbi Daniel Lapin Show, where, as usual every week, I, your rabbi, reveal how the world really works. Thank you for being part of the show. And as always, I very much appreciate everything you do to help promote the show. Some of you send links to people you think would like it. Others of you talk about it, but whatever it is, you're doing the right thing, and I very much appreciate it. If you haven't yet yourself subscribed, go ahead and do that. I got to confess, I don't know exactly why that's important, but everybody on my staff says, please remind listeners to subscribe. So I'm going ahead and doing that, okay? And I want them to know, everyone on my team, please know I have asked our listeners to go ahead and subscribe. I have done that. And what I'm going to talk about today is the lies told by prominent scientists, by distinguished scientists, people we always thought that we could rely on, in the context of the COVID crisis of about 5 years ago, the really unbelievable lies. And the reason I'm doing this is mainly because I want to remind myself and you that science is not the answer to everything. Because, like everything else, scientists have to translate science into usable terms for us. Doctors have to translate medicine into usable terms for us. And so to know that scientists, like anybody else, can and will lie for venal reasons when their interests are at stake, it's just good to know that, because it makes you less dependent upon a very frail reed. Makes you less likely to depend on science, and you shouldn't, actually. And so I think the story probably should start when the Obama administration, on the 17th of January, I think it was, 17th of October, 2014, banned gain-of-function research. Gain-of-function research, what is gain-of-function? Well, a clue is that a lot of the funding for it was coming from the Department of Defense. That's right. Gain-of-function research is essentially biological warfare. It's making diseases very much more dangerous, very much more contagious. And that's exactly what COVID was. It was an enhanced form of the flu. And anybody who suffered from it will remember that it was worse than any flu you've ever had before. So we'll launch into that 2014, realizing the tremendous perils of gain-of-function research, the administration said no more in America. So what then happened is that by 2017, Fauci very quietly lifted the gain-of-function moratorium. How on earth did he do that? And I'm going to read to you from the Washington Post. Josh Rogin says, the details are a little sketchy. I'm not saying Fauci did anything necessarily wrong or illegal, but I am saying that a lot of people that I know inside the Trump administration, this is 2017, so first Trump administration, had no idea that he had turned this back on. He found a way to turn it back on in the mess of the Trump administration, because the Trump administration is full of a bunch of clowns. So you could get things done if you knew how to work the system. So the 2017 gain-of-function research funding is back on. And one of the main beneficiaries was a company called Eco Health Alliance, run by a guy called Peter Daszak. and they got major funds from Fauci, from the National Institute of Health, and from his little project, National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease. And yes, this was going to be done with the Wuhan Institute. So Peter Daszak company, Eco Health Alliance, got huge sums of money from Fauci, which he then funneled on to the Wuhan Institute and okayed them to proceed with gain-of-function research on what would become the COVID virus. We also now know from emails and statements, affidavits, that Peter Daszak recognized that Wuhan was operating under particularly low safety standards. And Daszak said, but they make our system highly cost-effective relative to other bat virus systems. In other words, deadly viral manipulation on the cheap, right? What could go wrong? Okay, so that is what is happening. And the big issue was when COVID makes its appearance, where did it come from? And you'll remember the official line immediately was from the wet market in Wuhan, okay? Well, that's really what I want to focus on. In other words, that turns out to have been a flagrant lie, and that the people who lied to us, from Anthony Fauci downwards, you'll remember Biden gave him a retroactive pardon all the way back to 2014, particularly for what I'm talking about now. And the realization was official. Everybody knew. Everyone in power knew that it came from the Wuhan Institute, but we are going to tell the world that it came from the wet market. Why? I'll come to that as soon as I mention that for Memorial Day we have a promotion, and that is you can get the Tower of Power video program. It's a course, and you'll find it on the website at rabbidaniellapin.com. And if you've ever wanted clarity on why socialism, Marxism, is so seductive to academics, if you ever wanted to know why it is that socialism and Marxism is so alluring to so many people, that's what I cover in the video course called Tower of Power. Make a note of the discount code, please. It's Memorial 15. The word memorial, MEMORIAL, number 15. Memorial 15, and indeed 15 is how much percent you get off on what's already not a very expensive product at all, but one very worthwhile, I think, having in your library. So go ahead and do that. It ends midnight on Monday the 26th. Okay, so we've got about a week, or close, a little less than a week, to make the best of this. So actually, no, I'm wrong about that. The podcast will go live. You don't have very much time. Memorial Day is when that night, Monday night, May 26th, midnight, that's the end of this particular offer. But for now, there it is. Also, don't forget to join our Happy Warrior community, and that way you'll go straight and listen to the bonus podcast that I prepare exactly for members of the community. So thanks very much. Those of you who are members of the community, you go to the page wehappywarriors.com, and you're able to tap into everything there. For those of you who are interested in wanting to know how To become a member and what's involved, you go to RabbiDanielLapin.com, and you'll find information there on the We Happy Warriors community. Okay, that's pretty straightforward. And back to the shocking story of the lies they told about COVID. So you'll remember that the big debate, the big argument raging in 2020 and 2021 was, did the COVID epidemic come from an unforgivable leak from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, or was it from nature? Some bat in the wet market of Wuhan. Apparently the wet market is a place where they sell a lot of weird animals for human consumption, and that it was just one of those things. Bats carry this stuff, and but they don't. They carry ordinary bat flu. They don't carry the enhanced version, gain of function COVID, which is designed to be spectacularly lethal and contagious. So the official line was it was coming from the market. President Trump at the time was saying it came from the Wuhan Institute, which enabled the left to immediately suggest that anybody who followed this ridiculous conspiracy theory that COVID was a leak from an unsecured lab in Wuhan, well, you're obviously a Trump supporter, you're a right-wing bigot, you're racist against the Chinese, and you are a conspiracy theorist. And what I want to now show you is that a very important article came out in March 2020. So they really are nipping it in the bud fairly early, published in Nature Medicine magazine in March 2020, and it was called The Proximal Origin of COVID. And the article you can pull up online to this day, and it says that the consensus of the entire scientific establishment was that the virus almost certainly came from nature. I'm now reading from the report. We do not believe that any type of laboratory-based scenario is plausible. And that's what they said. But President Trump was not wrong. And the reality that I'm going to share with you now is that the proximal origin of COVID article that was supposed to put this thing to rest when it came out in Nature Medicine magazine, March 2020, was an act of deliberate scientific deception. So one way we know this is that 5 years later, we now know that all the major intelligence services in the West believe that a lab leak is indeed the likeliest reason for this epidemic. Both the United States Energy Department and the FBI came to the conclusion in 2023, with the CIA joining in about 6 months later. More striking, though, news from Germany, where the German spy agency, called the BND, says that COVID was a lab leak, and they knew it as far back as March 2020. So when the proximal source of origin of COVID appeared in Nature Medicine magazine, the German spy agency already knew. Now, the reason they knew is, as I'm going to show you, the 4 authors of the Nature Medicine magazine story saying that it's definitely from nature, collaborated with one another and with Tony Fauci by email prior to the publication of the article. And basically they were following instructions. Fauci told them to write an article that claims that COVID came about from nature, not from a leak at the lab in Wuhan that he, Anthony Fauci, was himself funding. Why would he do that? Well, because instead of going down in history as the saint that saved humanity by means of swift identification of the problem and production of vaccines, Fauci would go down as the villain who unleashed the epidemic on humanity. And so that's why he was very keen on pushing the blame onto nature. It just came. Some animal at the Wuhan wet market had it, and that's how it spread. The lady Chinese doctor at the main hospital in Wuhan wrote, as she started identifying COVID cases early 2020, she kept on giving interviews saying that all of these people, these original people, are getting it. As we track them, it all goes back to the Wuhan Institute. She has since been disappeared. And as far as I know, she has not been heard of since. So I would have to assume that she refused to keep quiet, and so they dealt with her one way or another. And that's kind of really what surrounds this entire COVID story. The German spy agency, the BND, investigated and produced their report that COVID did come from the Wuhan lab. They did that because German Chancellor Angela Merkel at the time had asked for the agency's assessment. Once they gave it to her, she never released it. She kept it under wraps. Boris Johnson in the United Kingdom asked MI6 to investigate where it came from. They did, and they said beyond any reasonable doubt, COVID-19 was engineered in the Wuhan Institute of Virology as part of gain-of-function research. Beyond reasonable doubt. Yeah, so he in his manuscript for his memoirs at the time, here's the words from his manuscript from Boris Johnson, Prime Minister of England's memoirs. Some scientists were clearly splicing bits of virus together, like the witches in Macbeth, eye of bat and toe of frog, and oops, the frisky little critter jumped out of the test tube and started replicating all over the world. Yet, however, in 2020 at the time, although he knew perfectly well that it was from the lab, Boris Johnson did not say that in public at all. The MI6 report alluded to the proximal origin paper that appeared in Nature Medicine magazine, and MI6 wrote that proximal origin article that appeared in Nature Medicine magazine and which tried to debunk the lab leak theory. MI6 claimed that the paper was part of a disinformation project by the People's Republic of China to embed the natural causation narrative and by misdirection to conceal its true origin and responsibility. There's a book that I've looked at here as well by two Princeton professors. It's called In COVID's Wake. And what they do is they trace the whole story of gain-of-function research in viruses, and they say that lab leaks had always been stressed as a major concern. And they actually list a number of outbreaks that killed people where labs did leak. Tony Fauci wrote an op-ed. Anthony Fauci writes an op-ed 10 years earlier in 2011 called "A Flu Virus Risk Worth Taking." And he writes in this sort of reassuringly that these engineered viruses are maintained in high security labs. Well, turns out that the Wuhan Institute had been experimenting with gain-of-function research funded by Fauci in a very low-security lab. You'd have thought that Fauci would raise the alarm. But I'm repeating this is very, very worthwhile remembering, that Fauci knew that they were using level 1, which is about the level of biosecurity you'd find in a dentist's office, instead of level 3 and level 4, which would be high-level security. So they weren't even being particularly careful about it at Wuhan. So anyway, this is it's pretty amazing stuff. Let me tell you some more. Okay, listen to this. So I've told you about this article, The Proximal Origin of COVID, which says, it's impossible to have come out of the lab. It came out of just natural causes. So one of the 4 authors of that piece was Christian Anderson. And in January 2020, he emails, and we've got these emails now, dated January 31st, 2020, Christian Anderson emails Fauci that some of the features of COVID-19 look engineered, and that 2 of his co-authors agreed with him that the genome was inconsistent with expectations from evolutionary theory. In other words, not from nature. All these emails, by the way, were obtained by Freedom of Information Act, and you can see them at the organization US Right to Know. That's not the only email that Christian Anderson was sending around. Remember, his article shows up in March of 2020. But early on, still in February, just 3 days after the first email I was talking to you about, he writes, "The main issue with writing this paper is that accidental escape is in fact highly likely. The furin cleavage site is very hard to explain without it. It's not some fringe theory." So there he's writing at the beginning of February. It is clearly escaped from the lab, not from the food market. February 4th, he writes, this is Christian Anderson, one of the 4 authors of the piece. He writes, "I think the main thing still in my mind is that the lab escape version of this is so friggin' likely to have happened because they were already doing this type of work, and the molecular data is fully consistent with that scenario." Anyway, that's early February. A month later, they published the paper trying to disprove any type of theory that it came from the lab. So what happened between January and February, when the authors of the piece know that it came from Wuhan lab, and March, when the paper gets published, and you'd have to be a conspiracy theorist to think it came from the lab. Obviously, this just came from nature. How does that happen? And that's what I want to explain now. So be aware that after the publication of the Proximal Origin of COVID article, Fauci constantly referred to the paper, and he never publicly noted that it came about because of him and that he had seen drafts of it before publication to approve. And then they got 27 public health experts to write an open letter to the Lancet medical magazine, and you can see this on their site also, supporting the March paper, The Proximal Origin of COVID, saying that it came from nature. And these 27 public health experts say, we stand together to strongly condemn conspiracy theories suggesting that COVID-19 does not have a natural origin. You won't be shocked to hear that one of these public health experts was Peter Daszak, who was he was the head of the company that was the conduit sluicing money through to Wuhan for the work to be going on in Wuhan. And these 27 public health experts who write for the Lancet, and they say, we condemn conspiracy theories. COVID-19 definitely came from nature. And Peter Daszak is one of them. And they say in their statement to Lancet magazine, we declare that we have no competing interests. But Peter Daszak is making a fortune funneling money from Anthony Fauci to the Wuhan lab. And so what he's saying is essentially, hey, I'm not responsible for the leak. No competing interests, really? Months later, Lancet, once this thing was all beginning to fall apart, Lancet disclosed that Daszak did have a competing interest and should not have been one of the 27 public health experts. But okay, so I guess the last important thing that you should be aware of is that at the beginning of February, Anthony Fauci and Francis Collins, also with the NIH, National Institute of Health, have a conference call with the scientists who they want to issue the statement that this is all from nature. So Fauci and Collins, who between them control almost all of the research funding for the scientists who are on this call, and again, this call was kept very quiet until years later. And on the call, Fauci is essentially telling these scientists, you need to issue a statement that this is from the market, this is from nature, nothing to do with the Wuhan Virology Lab. And that is exactly what the scientists, exactly what they went ahead and did. They were so successful in this by getting all these scientists. It's a little bit like later on, you'll remember how the Biden people got a large number of former intelligence people in America to claim that the laptop, the Hunter Biden laptop, wasn't real. These people are lying through their teeth. Well, over here as well, on the instructions of the people who control their funding, the scientists said, from our research, it's clear that COVID didn't come from the Wuhan lab. It must have come from the bat market. The New York Times in May, so this is happening February, March, by May 2021, the New York Times COVID reporter writes the following. Listen to this. It's unbelievable. Someday we will stop talking about the lab leak theory and maybe even admit its racist roots. Get it? To claim that the COVID was caused by a careless leak from the Wuhan lab is racist because President Trump called it Chinese flu. And so New York Times said, we'll eventually stop with the silly conspiracy theory that it came from the lab, and we'll recognize that people who said that are racist. That's May 2021. And everybody buys into this. There they go. They accepted it. Anyway, you get the idea, I think, right? You get the idea that eminent scientists lied to protect their grant funds and to preserve the mystique and prominence of science in general. They didn't want to cast any aspersions on a scientific lab for having caused the deaths of millions of people. No, of course not. And they wanted to protect their programs. And Anthony Fauci himself, well, got a pretty good idea of what sort of person he is. And yes, he really did need that pardon from Biden, because if this stuff were followed through, for Fauci not to be prosecuted would be an incredible miscarriage of justice. But of course, with Biden's preemptive pardon, he won't be. So at any rate, happy warriors, that's what we're talking about here. Very simply, a case of deliberate lying on the part of scientists. Yeah, scientists do lie. Science may not lie, but scientists do. And here we see more than clearly exactly what went on. Again, it's 5 years ago. It's not that long. But at the time, we all thought that we could rely on these scientific statements. And we couldn't. They lie. And so let this be a reminder to you and to me to always be sure not to underestimate our own ability to evaluate and to judge. Don't believe somebody just because they say they're an expert. Don't believe somebody because they have credentials. Because in the final analysis, integrity is very rare. And it's rare in the scientific and academic communities as well as anywhere else. So that's where we ordinary people become vulnerable, because experts tell us. But what they tell us is usually simply not so. So I hope, one could go on and on. There's so much of this stuff during the COVID period, but this is enough. Just know that the 27 people who signed a letter in Lancet magazine early 2020 lying, just know the people who authored the seminal article, The Proximal Origin of COVID-19 in Nature Medicine magazine, lying, and nobody more culpable for lying and for engineering the deception, and probably for the whole calamity in the first place. Yes, your good friend and mine, Anthony Fauci, and his sidekick, Francis Collins. What's there to say? I mean, you get the picture. So that's as far as we'll go for this particular show. Thank you again for being part of it. Thank you if you are a member of the Happy Warrior community. Thank you for being that. Don't forget to get your bonus podcast. And for everybody else, well, why don't you join us and become part of our band of brothers, our Happy Warrior community. So until next week, I hope that you are able to engineer growth and progress in all matters having to do with your family, your finances, your friendships, your fitness, and your faith. I'm Rabbi Daniel Lapin. God bless.